Hello, good morning and welcome to the Sunday Supplement. Manchester United travel to Liverpool, aiming to upset their bitter rivals. We'll be debating the gap between the sides off the pitch. What impact has Jose Mourinho made at Tottenham so far? It was another frustrating afternoon for them at Watford yesterday. And in the Championship, another defeat for Leeds United. Are they letting promotion slip away again? Well, there's one January transfer we perhaps didn't see coming, and that was Neil Ashton's departure from journalism and from this show for a rather exciting new venture. So we wish you well, Neil, if you're watching, quite sure you are. But over the moon to have passed my medical here and to have signed for such a great show. And on my full debut, I've got three fabulous teammates to settle in. Sam Wallace of The Telegraph, chief football writer. Rob Harris is global sports correspondent at Associated Press. And Neil Custis, football writer for The Sun. Don't forget to tweet the show at Sunday Sup, and the best of them will appear on your screen over the next 90 minutes or so. Now, to give you a bit of a flavour of what's on the back pages and on the front pages of the sports sections today, the Sunday Times, well, a lot of the stories obviously relate to rugby and Saracens, but we're going to be debating a little bit later on about how the financial regulation situation is affecting football, particularly with the likes of Sheffield Wednesday and Derby County. Birthday blues for Pep Guardiola yesterday with that late equaliser against Crystal Palace. And Manchester United set to splash £25 million on the 16-year-old Birmingham City midfielder Jude Bellingham, who scored again yesterday. On the back of the Mail on Sunday, rather big game today, Klopp's Kop takeover, and about how Manchester United are being pipped by Liverpool in the financial stakes as well. Plenty to talk about in the opening part. You're not in Fergie's league. Ole Kop might need many titles to be great. Bruno bid on the brink. Is that still happening? That's Neil's story today about how the price is being hiked up. We look forward to talking about that in a little while. Plenty on Liverpool against Manchester United, as you would expect. And in The Observer, amongst many other stories, including the ones we've just been talking about, a huge match at Boreham Wood today with two of the top three in the FAWSL. Susie Rack talking about Chelsea. If they lose at Arsenal today, that would be a huge blow for them. Arsenal, the league leaders, and 4 points clear as things stand. Now, your column today, Sam, is rather interesting and it's rather good, if I may say so. But what it does is list a ridiculous number of failings by Manchester United, starting with Marcus Rashford, how he was injured coming on against Wolves and went off again, even more injured than he came on. And there's a whole column's worth of failings. Talk us through them, please.
Well, it just struck me that if you were kind of taking the temperature of United this week, it summed up a lot of what I would try to explain as a club that's become very reactive. It seems to stumble along with their manager from one difficult situation to another. And the Rashford one was a perfect example. They're 0-0 in an FA Cup replay. Their best player, they know he's injured already, that's why he's on the bench. He's come off in the previous game against Norwich, and Solskjaer feels he's got no option but to bring him on. He has to win this game. I think the feeling being that the FA Cup offers a bit of salvation to him this season. And I think when a club goes into a spin in the way that United have done over the last 6 years, they're forced into decisions that they wouldn't normally make. And then you look at how the week pans out. Ashley Young, their long-serving club captain, a very solid player who's seen them through, who's won titles under Fergie and has played under a lot of managers, wants to leave, having not been offered a new contract. And at the last minute, United offer him a new contract in an attempt to stay. That doesn't look to me like sort of joined-up planning. You look at, for example, Paul Pogba, who's there, obviously gets a lot of blame for what goes on at United, and I don't think there's necessarily an exact science where you can say what Pogba's doing and United's failings correlate completely. But again, here's a player who's off again to Paris Fashion Week when United are preparing for a big game. What does that look like in the great round of things? United, as Neil's reporting today, are in this kind of bid and counter bid for a Portuguese midfielder who I don't think 3 months ago they would be bidding for in the market. So the idea was to kind of look at the club in the round, even players like Chris Smalling, who was loaned out last season, having a really good season at Roma. Lukaku, who's scored 15 goals at Inter Milan this season. Players that seem to have improved away from Old Trafford. And I just think when you put all those together, in a big picture, you see a club that is being controlled by events rather than being in control of events. And, you know, there could be a huge shock today at Anfield, because in the 1980s, when United were not a league, but in the pre-Fergie years, they did used to get results against Liverpool. But increasingly, it feels like a club where the big decisions are wrong, and therefore what they find themselves is sort of firefighting, I feel, on a weekly basis. And this week, in the lead up to a huge game, was a perfect example.
Neil, you cover Manchester United, of course, and those are the situations that they find themselves in at the moment. But sometimes it's not always where you are, it's the direction in which you're heading that's the issue. Are they addressing these issues, and are you confident that these won't be the case in the near future?
I mean, I think I agree with what they're trying to do at the moment in terms of forgetting about the star buys, forgetting about the big money buys, forgetting about the likes of Alexis Sanchez and what have you, and trying to build a team based on players who have grown together to a certain extent behind the scenes in the academy and what have you, but are also growing together now and will know better how each other play in the next 2 or 3 years. I look at the likes of Mason Greenwood and I think he's going to be one of the great strikers. You know, I look at Daniel James and I think he could be as good as Ryan Giggs. People have poo-pooed this, but Brandon Williams as well, great attitude. One of the reasons why Ashley Young was allowed to go, and Ashley Young was past his best. And if you're offered a 2-year deal in Italy and a 1-year deal in England, and you're at his age, you're going to go. So I have no problems with that. So I see players there who I think are going to grow into great players. The problem is, again, it's the patience over 2 or 3 years. The problem is that these young players have come into a team which is not dominant or on the verge of being dominant, as they did with, say, the class of 92, which had great players already there. You know, you had a Steve Bruce and a Brian Robson still around when these players were coming through. They haven't got that. They haven't got that to sort of help them, guide them, what have you. You know, Marcus Rashford at 22 is talking about being one of the senior players helping one of the younger ones. He's too young to be doing that. He's still developing his own career. But I'm mildly excited about the idea they've got at the moment. But Marcus Rashford may not hang around for 3 years to see this come into fruition. The reason Paul Pogba wants to go is because he's thinking, what, 3-year plan? I'm at the top of my career. I want to win more titles. I have a better chance of doing that somewhere else. But it's a very, very brave. I think it's a very brave idea they've got. It's very much in the history of the club and the ideas of the club. The problem is that at the moment, tactically, they only have one way to play. And if you stop that one way of playing on the counter-attack, they don't have a plan B. And that's something I know that frustrates the players, that they don't seem to have another way to play. But certainly, going back to your original point, the plan at the moment, I think, is a good one for the future.
I mean, the various issues off the pitch we've been debating, but in terms of on the pitch, the obvious question comes back to Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. It does, doesn't it? In terms of, is he the right man to take them forward? Now, there's no evidence whatsoever they're remotely thinking about making a change. But Graham Souness, pretty heavy hitter, saying, well, they just haven't improved since Solskjaer took over, saying in the Sunday Times today, I don't see why that would change soon. Jonathan Wilson in The Observer as well, saying very similar. Like, on what basis is he the manager, bearing in mind what he has or hasn't done before?
Yeah, but it's incredibly reactionary decision to appoint him full-time in the first place, talking about Sam's column and some of those bad decisions that have been made potentially by Ed Woodward. They had the chance to let Solskjaer just see the season out, to have a rational, long-term, deeper thinking over who was necessary to help the rebuilding process. And they gave this contract as a reaction to short-term success in the Champions League, rather than thinking, right, Solskjaer's here for the moment, we have time to the end of the season. He wasn't a manager in demand. He's not a manager that you'd probably want to find any other club trying to appoint at that time at all. So there was a time for that deeper process to think, go through the director of football decision-making. That's a constant thing that's talked about in terms of whether or not they need one. United have often said, yes, they're about to appoint one. Then they backtrack and say, actually, we don't need one at the moment. We're happy with our process at the moment. But there's certainly quite a crisis of confidence around the club in terms of just where they are at the moment. That was probably summed up by the fact Ed Woodward himself had to address the staff a few months ago to reassure them over some of the sort of sense of negativity around the club, whether around the finances or just the general sort of building process that was in place. And certainly, you know, they are very much now the inferiors in a league that they were for so long supreme.
I mean, to come back there, Neil, you're shaking your head about the director of football. I mean, it's in your paper today that they are looking to appoint one. Is that
I know,
right?
but this director of football, there's constantly people going back to it and back to it. Ed Woodward has a very big staff on the football side. He doesn't make all the football decisions. He has a very big staff who look certainly on the scouting side, certainly on the structure of the academy, in terms of who's right from the academy to bring through, in terms of who's right and who's ready to be bought from. He has a huge staff, so it's not like he's sat there, you know, on his PlayStation playing Football Manager or something like that and making decisions on that basis. You listen to some people and you think that possibly is the case. He's getting the money in so that the people who are more experienced with him can spend it properly. And you know, in the 6.5 years since Sir Alex has gone, let's remember they have won the FA Cup, the League Cup, the Europa League. They finished second in the league. They've got to another FA Cup final. I think Spurs would probably take that. I think Arsenal would probably take that.
But what about they've spent though? They spent about £840 million on transfers.
But
we're judging them against what they have done in the past. And in terms of the money spend, you know, you if you bring in someone of the standard of Louis van Gaal and the standard of Jose Mourinho, and they say to you, I want this player will make us better. Who is Ed Woodward to say, I disagree with you? You know, and he has supported those managers to achieve things at United. And to come second in the league 2 seasons ago, Mourinho said was one of his greatest achievements, and I agree with him. With that squad, it was a remarkable achievement. And, you know, we laud so many other clubs for what they're doing, and you denigrate Manchester United, who've been still continuing to win trophies throughout this period since Sir Alex has left. And one thing that I think people underestimate is the absolute seismic shift in Sir Alex leaving. Now, if every manager since Sir Alex could replicate what he had done, then he wasn't that good. Because if anyone can do it, you know. But he was that good, and everything that was Manchester United was in his head. It wasn't on a computer, it wasn't on a database, it wasn't there for someone to read and then become the new Sir Alex. It was all him, and that movement away from him was huge. And I don't think they've done that appallingly badly in the sense of that great movement away from him and away from the great teams.
That squad when Sir Alex left, obviously winning the title when he did go, but it involved a massive overhaul, didn't it? I mean, there were sort of 38, 39-year-olds sitting on the bench on that final game at West Brom.
They were champions, you know. They were champions, and for all the kind of criticism that Ferguson's had since, he left them as the best team in England. And yeah, maybe there were players that needed replacing, but I'm afraid Woodward has to accept he's ended up sacking every manager that he's appointed, apart from Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. You might argue that Moyes was a David Gill, Fergie appointment. He's one of the highest paid chief executives. In fact, I think he is the highest paid chief executive in the Premier League. They've spent, Mark Ogden's sort of big piece on ESPN, which is a very good read, £840 million on transfers. I mean, who gets the blame for this? Fergie? I mean, surely at some point, 6 years on after Alex Ferguson quits, the man who's run the club since then has to say it's on me. And I think one of the reasons that Solskjaer is going to be backed through and continues to be backed is because if Woodward sacks him, that's another manager, you know, that's Van Gaal, Mourinho, and now Ollie that he would have to sack. And that at some point, I know that the Glazers love him because he oversaw their takeover. But I mean, that's another strategy that hasn't worked out. And I think when you compare them with Spurs, I mean, the base that Spurs came from, they didn't sign a player for 2 windows and got to the Champions League final. Pochettino made players better.
That's key, isn't it? That's the point of
it's a really simple thing. He improved players. It's what, when we talk later about Bielsa at Leeds, he's made players better. I don't think players at United have gone there and improved. I think in many cases they've got worse, which is why they're paying £175,000 a week for Alexis Sanchez not to play for them. I mean, it's why Lukaku doesn't play for them.
But did you think Alexis Sanchez was a terrible decision to get him in when he came in?
I thought it was a risk, but Ed Woodward clearly thought it was a great decision because he made him the highest paid player in Manchester United's history, and it hasn't worked out. Neil, we've barely even talked about Sanchez. That is one of the... he disappeared as a player within 6 months of joining.
He had a lot of miles in his legs.
I think the mistake is possibly not what Sir Alex always used to do, was just not look at the player's ability, but looked into the character of the player, right? So, and he did that with every single player, looked into the character of the player, and he has admitted a couple of mistakes on that. I'll not name the players because I'm quite friendly with them, but he has looked at the... he said it himself on Owen Hargreaves, right? That's the player I'm thinking of. He said that he didn't get it right with him with the character. Now, you meet Owen Hargreaves and you think he's a lovely bloke.
And he also won the Champions League with United. He was one of the best players in the final.
I know, so I didn't get that, but he thought he didn't have the right character and didn't mix well, so that's the player I'm referring to, but I didn't quite get that. But he always looked into the character of the players. Now, I think if we'd looked deeper into the character of Alexis Sanchez, we could have seen problems over the horizon. But let's not forget that Alexis Sanchez's attitude and behaviour and everything in his time at Manchester United was absolutely disgraceful, absolutely disgusting. And if any huge blame needs to be laid, anybody does, it's at that players. Likewise, Romelu Lukaku in his last season as well, and how they were behaving and how they were poisoning things behind the scenes. And this is the lack of respect of some of these modern stars for a club of the size of Man United.
And now we're seeing it with Pogba. And you're getting some criticism, aren't you, for highlighting Pogba being at Paris Fashion Week this week. The fact he's not showing that commitment to the club, the fact social media doesn't reference Manchester United.
Just because I post on Twitter saying, oh, goodo, his ankle's getting better, he's at the Paris Fashion Show. It's just not a good look. It's just not a good look. When Bastian Schweinsteiger was constantly injured, he was travelling around the world watching his partner play tennis. Mourinho didn't like that. That's why he didn't play him, because he thought that it just shows a lack of commitment. Now, obviously, it's not going to hurt his ankle more going to this Paris Fashion Show. I fall asleep myself, but why? It's not going to hurt his ankle more, but it just doesn't look right. Why isn't he in the stands watching his team?
Why isn't he there? Doesn't it? Isn't that part of the discipline and respect of your manager?
But this is what Mourinho tried to do. Mourinho hammered him, had a go at him, was hard with him and all that, and it led to his own demise because he could see that he was taking the mick out of the football club and continues to take the mick out of the football club.
I think he may be there today. We should say that. We don't know that he's not going to be there. But I think it's a complicated one, and I think when you step back and look at the bigger picture, the fact I get what you're saying. The fact that the most expensive player at the club, the highest paid player, is sort of seems to have a fairly laissez-faire attitude towards not his injury rehabilitation. I'm sure he's very serious about that, but how he is perceived, and that was a big part of the way Ferguson ran Manchester United. It wasn't just about what they did; it was the perception of what they were, a very, very serious, ruthless, winning organisation, which is why I think, personally, and I'm not saying that Alex Ferguson's got all the answers in the modern era, it would have been very different for him. But I think that philosophy was very sound, that he liked, and of course he did lose control of certain players, and he lost control of Rooney at times and had to bring him back in. But I think that attitude of real seriousness, of that when things matter, when you're 4 days in from a Liverpool game, things close down, and this is, whether you're injured or not, you're in camp. And I think that's... I know Pogba gets a lot of criticism and some of it's unwarranted, but I think in this case, I think that was a bad call.
And just like in the summer, he went season ends, he goes straight to Tokyo and starts to
announce his own, he wants
a
to
new
leave.
challenge. And there's seemingly no consequence for that.
Send to the younger players who are looking up to the likes of a World Cup winner in Paul Pogba, despite him being a Manchester United player who's never had a good game. They look up to him and they take their... because he's popular in the dressing room, they do take a lead from him. But I have never come away from a Manchester United game and said, blimey, wasn't Pogba fantastic today? I've thought about Scott McTominay, who's actually a bigger miss at the moment than Pogba is.
In the draw in
Pogba being out the team at the moment is actually not making a huge amount of difference. They've actually played better. Think of the City game, the Spurs game, when he's not been in it.
Do you know what we were going to do in this part? We were going to be talking about Liverpool as well. We were going to be talking about what they're doing right and whether Manchester United can beat them today. So we're going to talk about Liverpool in just a moment instead when we come back, because there's been so much Manchester United to talk about. Also, we'll be looking at the impact that Jose Mourinho's been having at Tottenham. Stay there. Welcome back to Sunday Supplement. Now, this morning's papers make not very good reading for Manchester United supporters, though they might be happy come the end of the day. Liverpool supporters might be perfectly happy with what they're seeing because there's lots about how Liverpool are taking over from Manchester United, well, in lots of ways, of course, but particularly financially, which until now Manchester United have pretty much had the stranglehold on. The Mail on Sunday have done a big double-page spread. Trading places, Rob Draper and Nick Harris with this piece on United facing their worst nightmare, Liverpool taking over as top earners and could rule for years, although I think the fans rather care more about what's happening on the pitch, don't they? Anfield's 3 steps to domination, putting the right man in charge. How do United compare? Signing smart by understanding big data, and so it goes on. That's well worth a read. Rob, your thoughts on what Liverpool are doing right?
Well, in terms of the finances, it's an interesting look at the projection in terms of where they're heading, because it's less than 10 years ago now that they're on their knees in court fighting for their future, above the relegation zone. They've really had to turn things around under the Fenway Sports Group, and they've had to take some gambles on the way. Gambles that sort of question their very status, in terms of selling Coutinho in particular. Big sale that sort of questioned their sort of ambition at the time, as well as Suarez. But they've reinvested really cannily, and they've made themselves almost seem like the perfect owners. There've been some issues with the fans over tickets pricing when they expanded the ground, but it has all helped to really build the club up again. And the fact that they're in the Champions League now regularly, it is helping them collect that money, which helps them overtake United off the pitch. Because the one thing United have had to point to in this sort of post-Ferguson era we've been discussing before the break was the fact their financial dominance around the world, all the sponsors that they have. But actually Liverpool have now re-established themselves, used that historic brand, but also to really, turn themselves into a force again. So actually, when I did interview John Henry a year or so ago, when he was saying, why would any player want to leave Liverpool? Why do they want to go to Barcelona when, the state we're in and we're on the rise? And people sort of question that a bit. What a thing to say. But I think, it certainly looks now the destination club to be, or certainly one of them in Europe.
Yeah, leadership's such a huge thing in football, isn't it? Both off the pitch and on it. Robbie Fowler's done a piece in the Mirror today about this could come back and bite me on the bum. The lack of leaders puts United miles behind. Is that leadership off it as well in terms of the decision making, what they've got right?
Yes, I mean, you wouldn't want to tempt fate because sort of praising owners is all they know that they're just every club is a couple of bad sort of signings away from a lopsided squad or players that are on too much money. I think a couple of things stand out. I mean, Brendan Rodgers, when he was sacked in sort of the autumn of 2015, I mean, clearly he was struggling a bit at the time, but it was as soon as Klopp became available that the FSG and Mike Gordon and the people who run that organisation moved very, very quickly. They evidently realised that a top manager was available, would only be for a short window, and they had to do it. So that struck me as a brave move that worked out well. They could easily have done nothing. They could have sort of gone on with Brendan a bit longer, but they acted there. As Rob mentioned, the trading has just been there, has been key really. I mean, Klopp is clearly a very strong personality and a great coach, but you have to balance that with the trading, and I mean, I think Michael Edwards clearly is a technical. He's kind of the de facto chief executive. There is another chief executive, but he basically runs the player recruitment side, and he deserves great credit. I mean, he was criticised over the pursuit of Virgil van Dijk when the club had to apologise for Southampton. They got him eventually the following January, and they haven't really put a foot wrong. I mean, it does feel like late 90s United, where every player that the club signed just got better, and whether they signed a development player or a player, a Teddy Sheringham who was much more senior, it worked. That's how it feels at Liverpool. It won't last forever. It's impossible. And I think they would argue, yes, of course, the data is very important. That's a key part of any club's consideration now when they sign players, and it certainly the lower down the leagues you go, it's very useful. But it's not just that. They've clearly got a very good eye for a player and spot value in the market. You've just got to look at Minamino. Clearly, he's not proved himself yet in the Premier League, but that felt like a good signing. And the final thing I'd say is the stadium. I mean, you go to Anfield now; it's a completely different. It's such a different ground to the one 5 years ago. And remember, we used to say in the 90s that United Old Trafford was the stadium, and it had grown much quicker post Taylor report. It was they were fortunate. It's built in an industrial estate, so they could expand very easily. Whereas Liverpool, it took them a lot longer. They've just, I think it was a month ago, they announced their plans to redevelop the Anfield Road stand. So it just feels like a more modern stadium than Old Trafford. Old Trafford looks a bit tired now, and clearly investment in that has not been the priority over the last 10 years. These things matter. These things matter.
It still looks a better ground than Anfield, but.
But would you think so? I mean,
yeah.
From a distant shot, but I think the facilities inside are clearly
when you get close up, I don't.
Well, actually, I don't. Well, a lot of the parts inside the ground have actually been done up a lot recently, but I know it does need some work. You know, when someone sat 3 rows from the front and they're getting water dripped on them, I understand that. But it still looks a better ground than Anfield. I mean, I stand behind the road at Anfield opposite the Kop. I mean, that looks like someone made out of Lego.
But what you mean? You're talking about the Anfield Road opposite the Kop, but that's the one they're redeveloping.
Right, well, they are now. But at the moment, what I'm saying,
no, they were definitely slow.
All this eulogising about Liverpool and everything like that, as it stands at the minute, yes, I understand it. Let's remember that they blew the title last season. This time last year, when they went to Manchester City, could have gone 10 points clear. Great game, lost it, 4 points. Then they struggled for the next about 6 weeks, and City went ahead of them. So let's remember that. Let's remember.
Is that harsh? They blew the title last season.
Well, they did because they were 7.
They?
They were 7 points ahead going to the Etihad on the 3rd of January, 2nd or 3rd of January, and could have got 10 points.
They did quite good at the end of the season. Then.
And then they, I think they drew 3 out of 4 games or something like that. They had a dodgy patch.
One little non-winning run.
Well, still, but that's what you've got to do. I mean, when it's this high, when the bar is that high with Manchester City, that is what you've got to do. Credit to them, they've actually gone on, and City have, like, what they did last season seems to have exhausted them. But the reason we're talking about them is because it has taken 30 years for them to win the league, right? Didn't take,
Well, it took Manchester United 26 years.
Leicester have won it, in that time. It was 2 seasons ago that Manchester United finished ahead of them in the league, but Manchester United have apparently been desperate for 6.5 years, but they did finish ahead of them 2 years ago. So there is all this eulogy and everything like this about Liverpool, but let's remember there's been a very good 12 months, right? And I can understand.
Two Champions League finals.
And I can understand what Ollie Solskjaer's saying in terms of, I mean, you could say that at any club. You're never going to be like Fergie because nobody ever is. It's looking great at the minute. It's looking like they could have a period of dominance. But let's not go too far over the top about
Made some great financial decisions, haven't they? They've got the right manager who doesn't look to be going anywhere, and he's improving players.
And he was constantly,
you're not seeing these issues off the pitch.
losing finals as well.
He hasn't got midfielders going around the world being injured and deciding his people are deciding he wants to have an operation.
But while Mourinho was winning the Europa League and League Cup and get the FA Cup final, he was constantly losing finals, wasn't he? And as I say, blew that title. I'm just trying to give a bit of balance to it all. They are not. They have been the greatest team probably in the world at this point. But it's not been going on for 10 or 20 years.
And of course, United are the only team to take points off them this season in the Premier League, which we haven't highlighted probably enough.
And they could well win today, which will be on Super Sunday later
I'm not
from
sure about
4 o'clock. In theory, you just never know. Let's talk about Jose Mourinho now, which I know is your favourite subject, Neil. But Rob, your take on what he's doing at Tottenham. Because if he didn't have the name Jose Mourinho, just say it was, I don't know, Marco Silva or just somebody else who had exactly the same performances, picking up the same number of points, as few clean sheets as he had, what would we be saying then?
Well, there's certainly some irritation within Spurs that they think he's been judged on his past record, his past issues at clubs, his disputes and all the various instances, rather than being able to start on a clean slate. But you do see some of the old Mourinho traits carrying themselves into his time at Spurs, questioning some players in terms of their fitness. Ndombele the other week, he's quite curious on Danny Rose yesterday in terms of is he injured or not, and just why is he not necessarily in the team. And also there has been some grumbling as well in recent weeks. Not outbursts, not rants in any way. But the question is why, he's not deploying someone like Troy Parrott, a young striker, when he constantly complains he's lacking the striking options. And he seems to be trying to send out a message that he needs a number 9. Obviously, he couldn't predict the Kane injury. Could he have managed the situation better with Kane in terms of how much game time he was giving him and resting him?
That's England's fault, apparently.
Yeah, but he's also sort of almost talking down the players at times, almost suggesting, well, they can't possibly tap something in from 6 yards because they're not a finisher, they're not a target man, and almost blaming not getting a winner yesterday, not getting that equaliser against Liverpool. But you know, there probably was quite a lot of negativity after the defeat to Liverpool last week, suggesting that Mourinho's really, you know, not really setting up to win in any way. But Spurs did come close to grabbing that point against the leaders. So it's not exactly there was a huge gulf, not say in the way we saw in that City United game in the League Cup the other week. But yeah, if Chelsea hadn't lost yesterday, if they'd won, then Spurs would have been exactly as far away from Chelsea as they were when Pochettino was sacked. So we've not necessarily seen considerable progress, but he's not exactly been there that long to actually have his stamp yet on the club.
He's not been there very long, but we have seen his demeanour, you know, we've seen his press conferences, we hear the way he speaks. Is there a sense that he's just not the same character that he was when he was at his very, very best at Chelsea first time around?
He's certainly a lot older. I actually think, having watched him over the years, he's being a bit more positive. I know that's maybe quite coming from a low base. I think he is trying to sort of put a positive spin on things. I think from a distance he thought Spurs' squad was better than it was when he found, or more suited to the way he wanted to play. So I was at Watford yesterday and watching the game. He's got a very small centre forward, Lucas Moura, who he's forced to play. He's got sort of Harry Winks, who he seems to not be quite sure about, kind of quarterbacking the game against a really physical, big, strong Watford team who let you have the ball, but they're going to wait till you're tired out in around about the hour and then attack. And looking at it, I thought it's strange because that Watford team feels like a classic sort of Mourinho underdog team. You know, one that's set up to play against a better opponent. I don't think Mourinho necessarily wants to play the way that this Spurs team are used to playing, which is having a lot of possession. I don't think he's got the kind of profile of squad that he would ideally have. Look, he's got to make it work. But the two things he said yesterday, which is what he's been saying a lot recently, is I don't want to talk about injuries of the players who aren't, and then he talks about the players that are injured. And the big ones are Harry Kane, obviously, because it's Harry Kane, he scores all the goals, also because he's a physical presence, and Moussa Sissoko, who is the kind of player that Mourinho likes, you know, a very kind of dynamic, big, strong midfielder who gets the ball forward quickly. So I think actually he's been landed with a squad that's used to playing a certain way, the Pochettino way, the possession, on the front foot, dominating the game. It's not quite how he would have built it himself, and he's struggling with that a bit.
And the failing has been for some time, not building from a position of strength as well. Whenever Spurs have come close to perhaps mounting a title challenge or pushing on, they're not strengthened, particularly in January, as to add reinforcements, you know, that would just give them that lift. But I suppose the other thing we talk about, the lack of sort of striking options and the problems without Kane. Of course, Spurs did reach the Champions League final with Kane missing for those final weeks of last season.
It's an odd one when people say, well, you can predict an injury to Kane. Well, you could. You know, he could get injured any game, so it's always a bit odd when people they've never quite solved that. But, I mean, you're a big defender of Jose Mourinho traditionally, aren't you? Are we judging him too soon at Tottenham?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, you're talking about the best coach in the world of the last decade. If you look at his achievements, if you look at the treble at Inter Milan, if you look at him overcoming Pep Guardiola's Barcelona side to win La Liga, I mean, just incredible achievements. Going back to Chelsea to do it again. It doesn't always work when managers go back. It very rarely does. And again, I'll point to his achievements over 2 years at Manchester United as well, which are excellent. I mean, I look at Spurs yesterday, could have easily won the game, played the last 20 minutes against Liverpool. I thought they were excellent. I haven't seen anyone quite that, you know, keeping the ball away from them or as much as they did in that period. And he's, you know, there's certain people have something stuck in their head about Jose Mourinho which just won't go away. And it colours them. He's miserable, he's this, he's that, he's falling out with people left, right and centre and all that sort of thing.
But that's not made up, is that? I mean, we all talk to people in the game. We do hear about one day he's your best friend, the next he totally blanks you in the corridor. We hear all these things from people who know
and I'm sure it happens at other football clubs as well. You know, a lot of people fell out with Sir Alex Ferguson and ended up leaving the club, not least David Beckham, Ruud van Nistelrooy, Roy Keane. We're talking about...
That was to make the club better, wasn't it?
Yeah, but he's trying to make the club better by calling out people like Paul Pogba, for example, and trying to get him to produce performances like he does for France or Man United, and he got slated for it. I mean, we in the media complain about, you know, managers not being open enough and what have you. And then when you get a manager who actually says, well, actually, this is why things are going wrong, he's not playing very well, he's not playing well, everyone's going, oh, my God, you can't say that. You can't criticise the players, poor lambs. He comes along and does it. Now, how does a player react? Does he go, oh, that's terrible, you know, I want to move away? Or does he say, I'll show him? Now, if you have a player who says, I'll show him, I think you've probably got and found a better character in your squad than the one who's going to sulk and off he goes.
But do you see him as being the right fit for Tottenham?
But you say the right fit for Tottenham. Tottenham has played all this wonderful football for 30 years and didn't win an away game for 12 months and stank the place out in the Champions League final against Liverpool. Yes, I think he'll be better than they were in Pochettino over the last 12 months, who's been hailed as the greatest manager ever without winning anything there. So, yeah, I think he will do a very good job there.
And, of course, Pochettino was, in his final few weeks and months, either given a sense he wanted to leave or grumbling himself about the conditions as well.
They hadn't played well for about a year. Yeah. They hadn't won an away game for about 12 months.
But as with Liverpool, they've come from a much lower base. I mean, Tottenham's net spend is nothing like Manchester United's. I mean, Pochettino took players that the previous managers, that Kane was about to be sold. I mean, and to be fair, Tim Sherwood kept him in the side and made them into better players. I mean, they've improved players, and I think if we go back to the United question, is how far they've fallen from where they were financially, miles ahead of anyone else, champions of England. And Liverpool, Spurs were not in that elite, which, as we saw it a few years ago, which was clearly City and clearly Chelsea because of who their owners are, and Manchester United because of the revenue that they can generate. So I think when you judge a manager, you've also got to take into account his resources. And yes, Pochettino not winning a trophy, he would admit himself, will always be held against him. But look where he got Spurs and look where he took them. That's the big thing.
I went into Pochettino a few weeks ago. He was trying to remind that as well. While he was very coy of what he could say about the club, there were difficulties he had to cope with.
OK, that's it for part two. When we come back, we'll be looking at a couple of sides who have really kicked on after promotion. We'll debate how they've done it. It's Wolves and Sheffield United, by the way. Welcome back to Sunday Supplement. We've been talking about a huge game on Super Sunday later, and that is Liverpool against Manchester United. But there were some rather good games yesterday as well. And Wolverhampton Wanderers coming from 2 goals down away at Southampton. She's going to get more than a little mention in the next part and possibly beyond as well. But in terms of the back pages, a lot of them dominated by the game later and Manchester United and Liverpool, where they stand financially. Pep rocked by Palace revival yesterday with that late equaliser, the own goal there. On the front of Total Football in the Mirror. That's the Mirror. Timu Pukki and the 1-0 victory, keeping Norwich just in touch with the pack above them. The Sunday Times talking about the Saracens issue. Again, we are going to be talking about financial fair play in football and the issues coming up. Pep having the Blues on his birthday yesterday. Man United set to splash £25 million on Jude Bellingham, the 16-year-old at Birmingham City. And plenty also on Bruno Go United, the price being hiked up to £70 million for Sporting Lisbon's midfielder. Manchester United wouldn't mind having him in their side, but really not for that amount of money. Now, we're going to talk about a couple of sides who've done incredibly well after promotion to the Premier League. Last year, it was Wolverhampton Wanderers when they won promotion, won the title, and then finished 7th in the league. They're now in the last 16 of the Europa League, just 1 year on. They had a little blip recently, but they did come from behind 2-0 down to win at Southampton yesterday. And Sheffield United, let's start with them, because we keep talking about what an incredible job that Chris Wilder is doing, but the fact that he's done it with players from John Fleck, for example, who scored yesterday, being a free transfer from League One Coventry City, and John Egan costing £4 million. Ollie McBurney, OK, they spent £17 million. But it's so much a team effort from him, and also just what he's doing as a manager, the man management of him. What have you made of them? Yeah,
and actually when you're bringing a team up through the divisions, where that helps to sort of foster this sort of unity and sense of purpose that allows you to then go on to bigger challenges if you can sort of work with the players you've got. I thought it was interesting yesterday after the draw at Arsenal, where he's talking about actually they wanted to win and the sort of questioning the lack of ambition, perhaps at times the fact they only played for the first and last 10 minutes, thinking they could actually go to Arsenal to grab a lot more, and the fact you've got a player like Billy Sharp who's setting up that equaliser, someone who sort of struggled to sort of cement his place necessarily in the team, but such a key figure in the club's recent history as well, and sort of questions over what his next sort of move is, whether he needs to move on. But it's where you sort of benefit from that sort of experience in and around the club, and again, doing it without spending significantly or massively changing the squad in a way that, say, Aston Villa were forced into sort of many changes because there was a lot of sort of movement over the summer, they've allowed to sort of maintain this sort of cohesive unit. Also, while at the same time, they've also had this ownership dispute which rumbled on for so long. The Saudi Prince who gained control of the club, and that still does rumble on with the previous ownership as well. And whether or not, once that's all fully settled in, then they do actually go and spend a lot more, because they've only really spent, I think it's like 40 million in
43 million
in the build-up to this Premier League season. And if now they're going about things the right way, they've got survival secure, they know they're going to get that 100 or so million now plus for staying in the Premier League, which allows them to start to build on and plan for the future now. But certainly been a great addition for the Premier League.
Yeah, 50 to 60 million pounds of that TV money is going to have to go to Kevin McCabe after that issue. But what does this say to other clubs when they look at Sheffield United? And they'd love to be able to do that, wouldn't they? Good judgment of acquisitions from elsewhere. And again, it comes back to the right man in charge.
Yeah, Chris Wilder is crucial. I mean, he is the club, really, isn't he? And he's got them 2 promotions now. I think one thing Wilder's obviously got is great faith in his players. I think it's a slight misnomer to say that he's just kept the team that's come up from League One. He's been quite ruthless along the way in getting rid of players as they've come up the 2 divisions. But when you look at that squad, I mean, you mentioned some names there like Fleck and Stevens. What they've done, as we've discussed earlier, is they've been able to spot value in the market. They've seen players who are undervalued, who they believe can perform at a higher level, and they've got them. And it's really as simple as that. I mean, one player that the one Sheffield United player that I've interviewed this season, who's again has had a very interesting career, is Jack O'Connell, who's that rare breed of left-footed centre half, which, as we know, Gareth Southgate's often been short of those in the England team. He's one of those players. He was in England. I think he was in England under-19s captain. He's had to go on a lot of loans for his career. He didn't make it. Blackburn never gave him a chance when he came through there. He's one of those players. I think they got him from Brentford in the end. He's one of those players that now, I mean, his value has just gone through the roof, and he certainly will be. He will be on the long list for England. That's the template for Sheffield United. They've done it brilliantly over the last few years. The recruitment clearly is very, very good. The trick is to sustain it. It's so hard because not only you're buying at a higher level of the market, as Rob says, you've got more money, but also supporter expectation goes up as well.
You literally can't make a mistake with any of those signings, can you? Like the bigger clubs have. I totally agree with the point Rob made earlier, and that's the thing that impresses me about Wilder. And was brilliant watching him on Match of the Day yesterday about how poorly he thought they played in that period between the first 10 and the last 10 minutes. And he approaches every game like that, as if, sometimes you hear the messages from Farke at Norwich, and it's almost as if it's like still a lovely party that the FAC would be here, but nobody expected us to stay up. Whereas Wilder's like, no, I didn't play very well today. I don't care what position we're in the league, but we should be playing better than that. We should be doing better than that. He's approached it. He's also come up and approached it as if we should be a team in the top 6. And I think that attitude has run through the club. So, yeah, on that point, I think you're totally right. I think that's the only thing I've agreed with.
Transmits that ambition throughout the squad as well. It gives them that sort of sense of drive that it's not just enough to even just gain a point at Arsenal. Maybe that says a bit about Arsenal now, but it's...
So much of it does come from Chris Wilder. I mean, when I started off at Radio Leeds about 18 years ago, he was at non-league Halifax. And it's not like his trajectory's been that, is it? He's worked and a brilliant job at every club he's been to, at Oxford, at Northampton. And he's been apparently the same all the way through. He's just honest. He's straight down the line. He tells the players what he expects of them, and they respond accordingly. And he doesn't have any bad apples. There's none of this. I know it's difficult at a higher level. You've got players on 200 grand a week. I get that. But he doesn't have any of that nonsense. If you don't perform, you don't have the right attitude, you're not in his side or squad.
I have to say I felt very old when I watched Fleck scoring yesterday, because I used to cover his uncle, Robert, when he was at Norwich City. And he amazingly, he looks like him and he plays like him. And when I see him running with the ball, he looks the same, and he's got that same sort of infectious enthusiasm. But I did feel very old when he was being interviewed.
I suppose, Norwich is a team that's tried to sort of stick from its ways from gaining promotion, but isn't finding it going the right way. In the fact,
yeah, but they have. But Sheffield United also, there's this misnomer based on something from 20, 30 years ago, that Sheffield United they'll be strong and big and defensive and big long
Keep
balls.
It tight and,
they play great stuff.
Yeah.
They're great stuff, but defensively they're just brilliant.
That's one of the best things about them, isn't it? They haven't fit into any of those stereotypes.
No.
And Wolves, who are just ever so slightly above them in the table, just a point above them, 6th now, after having had a pretty poor run actually, looking as though they're totally run out of steam, basically because they look cream crackered. And at half time, everyone's like, right, that's it, the squad's not big enough, the season's in free fall. 3 goals later, and suddenly they're all fit as daisies. What have you made of their season so far?
Well, the fact they're able to pick themselves up from positions like yesterday. No team's picked up more points from losing positions than Wolves.
Points,
And I think next to Leicester with 11. So it shows the fact that they're able to find that drive to turn things around in what's been a very demanding season for them. It started way back in July, those early Europa League qualifiers. They've had to negotiate all the way through the group stage, now into the last 32. So it's, there's a perseverance there that they need to, find. But obviously, Raul Jimenez, so crucial. 18 goals, another 9 assists as well. So, in him, a key figure who can provide the goals that, perhaps other teams are lacking as well.
Is it true that United were in for Raul Jimenez?
Well, I wish they got him because, 19 goals and 9 assists, but also yesterday was a great example of what he's all about. And I just love that front three of Neto, Traore and him and how they played yesterday. And I thought it was clever how he switched them about at half-time. I think, did he put Neto a little bit deeper behind the two when he started pulling the strings? And, I don't see them as often as, because I cover United. But when I saw them at Molineux earlier in the season, they were excellent, came back again after Manchester United were dominating the game against City. That was an incredible comeback on a really buzzing day at Molineux. And anyone who's not been to Molineux on a big night, go, because it's one of the greatest atmospheres in football. And that is helping also to carry them to these results. But 39 games they've played already, and yesterday's comeback showed that there's still plenty of energy. But to watch, the cup game midweek against Manchester United, I thought for big parts of it they were the better team. And to watch those three going forward is fabulous. And again, they haven't got into that stereotype of promoted side to let's just see what we can do here and stay up and take the TV money. They've really taken giant strides. And it's just wonderful to see, because that club has for so long needed this.
Obviously helped by the Jorge Mendes connection, be able to bring in players.
Yeah, but there was criticism over that at the start. It's all wrong. And why? They've just used someone who's got brilliant connections in football to make their club better.
Well, they have paid a lot of money as well. I think it's
You're
right in saying
by how much clubs spend money, as if Real Madrid spent the most money for years and still couldn't win the European Cup.
But their losses when they came up from the Championship in that year were the big. Right here, Rob, the biggest ever. I think they were enormous. So they gambled massively. Whatever Mendes does for them, it's never been made clear, but evidently he is a part of the operation.
Contract, isn't it?
Yes.
But they also have the sporting director in Kevin Thelwell, who fulfils that role
but
on a day-to-day basis.
It wasn't love of Wolverhampton Wanderers that these players came. It was because they could pay the fees and they could pay the...
Giammattino from Monaco. I did ask him, actually, the first time I spoke to him, I said, what was it about Wolverhampton that was so attractive compared to Monaco? He fudged it.
I would take Wolverhampton over Monaco every time. There's a place where you can't get a cup of coffee for less than £6. It's not for me. But I think they made a financial calculation that they were going to do this, and they came up, and they've clearly got a very good coach who, as has been mentioned, is very good at those in-game substitutions, who makes changes. But it's a different strategy. It was one where they took on big losses to do it. What I would say, though, is they, again, a coach that improves players, and Adama Traore is one of the stories of the season. There's a great line from Nuno where he says, we don't give up on any player. And I think Traore is now, he's redefining, in some respects, what a footballer looks like, in terms of his physique. But he will be he's one of the breakthrough players of the season. And I dare say that Wolves, that there is a price on every Wolves player's head. They're still a trading club. But every club, Southampton did it very successfully for a few years, finds their niche. And clearly Wolves have got theirs. They've got a steady flow of players in, but I imagine that at some point they will trade up. They will have to sell players and bring new ones in.
Which sort of provides that sort of ceiling question whether or not they can make it into the Champions League at any point, or actually this is their level. And, you know,
well, that
their
is the
connections
aim.
will
The
move them,
owners,
but, yeah.
the owners want Champions League. I mean, they make no bones about it. They don't care about the tradition and who usually the top four is. That's absolutely what they're aiming for. But a lot of pressure on Nuno. But I mean, what we were talking about, there's a theme, isn't there, about managers making players better. I mean, it sounds so obvious, but making the best of the players they've got, like Klopp. Clearly has been doing that at Liverpool. Manchester United have had so many different managers that now they're talking about is Ole Gunnar Solskjaer the one to be doing that. But I mean, Nuno, in terms, have you heard anything about him being linked elsewhere because of the phenomenal job he's doing at Wolves? By all accounts, he's absolutely committed to the project and is earning perfectly well. Thank you very much.
I mean, obviously, when the Arsenal job came up, his was one of the names sort of in the frame there, and that'd be one of the challenges for Wolves potentially to try to keep hold of him, whether or not it's a job here or a job abroad as well. But certainly his credentials have soared as, you know, taking Wolves so far as well, and his name will start to obviously be even more so in the frame when we see other jobs probably come up in the summer. But you know, we do see managers drift in and out of their sort of attractiveness in terms of the appeal in the market as just takes a few results.
And where's he going to go that's better than Wolves?
Yeah, well, exactly. Comes back to that every time.
That's what keeps them there.
Yeah.
Where
keeps them there.
Chicken balti pies. I mean, we should have some in the centre here. Never mind these fancy
Well, no, we're better than these.
muffins. They are real, but they just might not be very fresh. That's the thing. Give that one a poke in the break. Anyway, coming up in part 4, we will be discussing a couple of huge clubs in the Championship. There are a lot of them, but these two in particular, Leeds United, are they letting it slip again? And Sheffield Wednesday, they're waiting for an EFL ruling. How has it come to this? Stay with us. Well, here on Sunday Supplement, we're going to change tack slightly and talk about a couple of enormous clubs in the Championship, both in Yorkshire, as it happens. Leeds United, they had 1 point from the last 12 possible at the end of last season and slipped out 2-0 league lead in the playoff semi-finals as well against Derby, let it slip, and they're very, very concerned that it might be happening again. They lost at QPR yesterday, very unfortunately, though, didn't they? What do you make of where they are in terms of off the pitch as well as on it, Rob?
I mean, we saw Patrick Bamford miss that penalty yesterday. It's obviously such a key moment, and their over-reliance on Bamford seems to be a real issue. The fact they haven't got additional striking options necessarily in there to provide that support, which you need in the long Championship season, particularly when you've gone through already the collapse last season, the so many years of struggling to make it back out of the Championship, and it's that sort of lack of depth there that really seems to be costing at the moment. And we've heard for some time they've been in talks with the same Qatari owners as PSG, Qatari Sports Investment, about some investment or a complete takeover. Doesn't seem to be happening at this stage. Obviously, that would help to sort of push them to that extra level, because you've got the current owner, Talim Ranazani, who he's got a broadcasting operation which has, you know, various issues as it's trying to sort of navigate its way into the new broadcasting landscape. So, you know, he's not necessarily putting the money in or has the funds available to shore up in the way that perhaps fans might like to see. But yeah, they were quite impressive at Arsenal the other week. They had a good first half in the FA Cup, but then obviously faded away, perhaps unable to keep up that intensity that Bielsa likes through the second half to find a way to win there.
And they're talking about needing strikers in the transfer window, and the manager Bielsa yesterday saying, "Oh, we need to replace Nketiah." We didn't play Nketiah enough. That's the whole point that he's gone back to Arsenal, isn't it? It seems a little bit of a mess. They promised that they'd sign players early, and nothing's materialised yet. Yeah,
I think Nketiah didn't really. The Leeds fans that I know say that Nketiah didn't really suit his system. He's more of a poacher rather than Bamford is more suited to the kind of high-energy press that Bielsa has. I mean, they're an enormous team. We know that in newspapers because whenever anything is published about Leeds, it gets a lot of hits on our website. And they are one of those clubs where the potential is there to be unlocked. They've had a long time out of the Premier League. But it's as with Wolves, it's as with Derby County and Sheffield Wednesday. It's how you get them back, how you make that leap, how much you stake on that leap to get them into the Premier League. Because once they're there, then you open up a whole new financial landscape. Clearly, Bielsa, if he doesn't go up this year, it's very hard to see him staying. And he's captured the imagination of the Leeds fans. They seem to really love him. But it's getting them over the line, and they haven't. Again, we've talked. They haven't signed players when the expectation was that they would. They've done a lot of contracts with key players, but it does feel that the squad is lacking something. I mean, we look at clearly Liverpool's 30-year quest for the league title is one of those great kind of finger quotes holy grails of for the fans of that club. I would say promotion back to the Premier League, although it's not been as long, is one of those for Leeds. They've won a league title since Liverpool won their last one. So where they go after Bielsa, I think, is a big worry for Leeds fans, because if they don't go up this season, then they lose this famous manager. It'd be very hard to see him staying for another year. And what's the financial situation like once, when with another year outside the Premier League?
It's a huge concern, isn't it? I mean, we all know what a massive club Leeds United is. But perhaps the younger kids of today don't quite appreciate the rivalry with Manchester United, for example, having lived in Leeds. Wow, it is very, very real, isn't it? But from a media perspective, Neil, what do you think it would mean for the hits, for the clicks, for the sales of newspapers, etc., if Leeds United were to get over the line?
Well, the big thing you mentioned there, Jackie, was about that it is a slightly historical, misty-eyed thing with Leeds. So this generation may not quite get it, but we certainly get it. We get the. I always remember Sir Alex going on about how when they were constantly getting to the tail end of the Champions League and a title race and all that, and then suddenly they might have to play Leeds. It was like, I can't rest players, I can't take my best players out. I literally just can't because of that tribal thing with Leeds, because my fans won't forgive me. And he constantly went on about this in English football, about the tribal nature of certain fixtures, which meant that he just couldn't rest players or anything like that because the fans wouldn't forgive him. And Leeds was a huge one. I mean, the very fact that Manchester United fans still chant about hating Leeds. I mean, they haven't been relevant to them for 20 years, but they chant about hating Leeds more than any other club, even more than City. So that shows you that history's still there. And I think there's still something great in football where you can still grab onto that. And I know that a certain fixture is still going to, make the heart go a little bit faster and make that occasion. And as we all know, it's not. I mean, it looks a dilapidated old place now, but it's still got that something, hasn't it?
Absolutely.
When you go there.
England played there as well, Osh. It's a fabulous atmosphere, if not the most up-to-date stadium.
No. I mean, that Leeds win at Old Trafford a few years ago, well, it's probably about 10 years ago now, still probably talked about as well as a big moment when it was hoped to be sort of a part of the sort of rise back up to the top again, but it was just merely a sort of high point in the sort of long journey of frustration. But that reminded us just that intense rivalry that.
Do you think that? Do you think? I mean, we always talk about weight of history with Liverpool, in their quest for the title, and I do think there was a bit of that last season, particularly after they had lost at City. Do we think that comes into it with Leeds? Do you think that there is something there where they think it is such a huge club that when they get close, it might get a little bit nervy, as it did against Derby?
I mean, it must be, because they're always told, obviously, they're a big club and they should be in the Premier League. So that's got to weigh on the players.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about Sheffield Wednesday. Now, that Premier League would love it, by the way, if Leeds United went up, wouldn't they, in terms of global reach and finances and all the rest of it. But Sheffield Wednesday, another club from when we were growing up, were huge. But this May, it'll be 20 years since they were in the Premier League. And now they've got this situation with financial fair play, and just like Derby, the issue with selling the stadium to their owner. It seems perhaps they might not have done it particularly within the laws as things stand. Just explain what's happening there.
So they were charged with misconduct in November. You are allowed to sell your stadium. The problem is that they appear to have the land registry documents which track the sale of the stadium do not fit with the accounts to which the money was used to allow them to comply with financial fair play. The owner, Deshvan Shanziri, has been charged himself, so have two former executives at the club. So that's serious. I mean, we should say that they are going to vigorously defend those allegations, but clearly it's of huge concern. I think my colleague John Percy has written this week that the clubs want this situation resolved. The Championship clubs want this situation resolved as soon as possible, so they know what the league looks like if there is going to be a points deduction, and if there's there is. I mean, there's a 12-point deduction is on the table. I mean, it could be more if the EFL decide, but we are now seeing, I think, the financial fair play really biting in the Championship, and clubs pointing the finger at each other and demanding that the executive of the league clamp down on what they see as I said financial fair play. It's profit and sustainability rules, which they've all signed up to.
And the question is whether or not the stadium sale itself, which was valued at around 60 million, was overvalued in terms of, because they were selling it to themselves, basically their own owner, the Thai tuna magnate, and whether they were trying to generate that cash to comply, in the same way we've seen at Derby as well.
Yeah, and the fans standing by, waiting, praying that the potential points deduction isn't too serious. We shall wait and see on that one. Well, coming up in part 5, we're going to be discussing what it's like to be a journalist during the transfer window in January. A few tales from behind the scenes coming up next. Welcome back to the final part of Sunday Supplement with Sam, with Rob and with Neil. And in this part, we're going to be discussing the January transfer window. Not who's going where particularly, but what's it like being a journalist in the transfer window? Because we all get told lots of stories. We hear bits and bobs from agents, etc. But you have to try and sift the wheat from the chaff. You're shaking your head.
Well,
you would only ever print what you know is 100% definitely going to happen tomorrow, and that's it.
Well, I try to. I mean, you know, Manchester United, for example, have been linked to 90 players, right, this month. 90.
Just by you?
Well, no. I mean, but this is the thing. You know, I go into my local pub and a Man United fan. The first thing I say, who we're going to get? Who we're going to get? You know, and are we going to get Fernandes? Are we going to get this, that, and the other? And that is the first question asked. That's why it generates so much interest and what have you. What you've got to try not to do, though, in our positions is just throw any name that comes in the hope that they're going to buy one, and then you can say, we told you first. You know, because I think that can be irresponsible. I think what we've got to try our very best to do, and it's not always easy, is just give the name of someone you're convinced that they are in for and they're going to try and get, rather than scattergun it in the hope that one of them falls in the lap. I mean, for example, Manchester United have 80 scouts around the world, right? If a Manchester United scout goes to a game, they're suddenly linked with a player. Ollie Solskjaer suddenly has a personal scout, so now stories seem to have more weight if it's Ollie's personal scout, as if like he sort of travels around with him in a suitcase or something. So, I mean, it's much better now. I mean, this used to go on till March, April, but now we've got the actual windows. There's an intensity to it, so it's much easier in that sense from our point of view. But our job is to use our experience, knowledge, people we know, to sort out what is serious and what is not. What is a name that's being thrown at them from an agent who wants the move? I mean, I remember Iker Casillas, right, was never close to signing for Manchester United, but every time he wanted a new contract at Real Madrid, and given that he was ever over 40 years, his name would be linked with Manchester United, because his agent wanted him linked with a move to Manchester United, because it would then make Real Madrid rush to the negotiating table to give him a contract to keep him at the Bernabeu. That happened every 4 years. Iker Casillas is on his way to Man United. Well, he's not, actually. So everyone's in it for their own gain. So, for example, with Fernandes this week, or this past fortnight, Sporting Lisbon are desperate for the money. They are desperate for the money, and they have been pushing it through the Portuguese media, through the Lisbon media, that he's definitely on his way. It could happen tomorrow. This is the amount, thinking that's going to push Manchester United into doing it, because the unfortunate thing for Manchester United fans is if this doesn't go through, it's, oh, Woodward's made a mess of it and all this sort of thing. Well, he is not worth 80 million euros. Which is what they're asking for. And that's another problem Woodward had, is as everyone comes to United, because they know how desperate they are to get back to the top of the league, they stick another 20, 30 million quid on. And they've been paying it. They don't want to do that anymore. And Solskjaer doesn't want to do it because he doesn't want a player to come to him based on the fact that he's going to be the biggest paid player at the club, or triple his wages or something like that. He wants them there because the player wants to be at Manchester United and to make his name there. And equally at board level, they're not going to have the mick taken out of them in the way Sporting are for this player who nobody else is queuing up to buy. Tottenham made an effort to get him in the summer at 45 million euros, and they were turned down, so they said, fine, not that bothered. So Sporting have to be careful, because this could break down easily.
What's your perspective on life as a journalist during the transfer window? Because everybody wants to get the big name, everyone wants to be first, don't you?
I think as a journalist, I'm sure the lad's experience, and yours is the same, Jackie, is that often the stories that you really know the ins and outs of, and you feel like you trust the people involved, are quite few and far between. And I tend to be quite conservative in that unless I know the people at the club or the agent or the player involved, I maybe this is not the best philosophy, but I only have these kind of small areas that I will pursue stories on, because I know that I've got a good, all being well, I'll be right on. So I think often you'll write a story about a player, a club, and people will assume that you then know everything that's going on at that club, but it may just be that you know a particular agent, or the selling club is one that you know well. They used to say that newspapers are tomorrow's fish and chip paper, but unfortunately digitally now your stories live forever. And I think that's actually quite a good thing. I think that's changed a lot of people's. I think the old days of the transfer flyer are really out the window, and I think there were people who would throw a lot of names at clubs, and I think the standard has improved. I really do.
You can't get the fish and chips in newspapers anymore, can you? That's a genuine question. I can't remember the last time I did.
No, it's a good point. Yeah, I think
it's just the white.
Get that little layer in between.
I think the notion of that your back catalogue, so to speak, would be forgotten is no longer the case.
You get reminded every day on Twitter if you get anything wrong, wouldn't you?
Yeah, but there's also a sense that some fans maybe don't understand, which is just because a transfer doesn't come to fruition, it isn't completed, doesn't necessarily mean it was false, it was made up to start with, because deals collapse. Some negotiations are harder than others. So, they might call out journalists for a deal not happening. And one great example from a club, the Manchester United website, for many years still, till they revamped it, had lingering on there the announcement that they agreed a fee to sign Aaron Ramsey from Cardiff, and it never obviously happened, but, just showed there in daylight how deals don't happen. And the other thing is the fact that some journalists necessarily have to cover transfers, have to cover a lot. There's an expectation for clicks. Maybe they don't want to be spending their entire time chasing sort of transfer stories, and others perhaps can do fewer of them.
There's also, I think, the feeling more and more, because there are not just the clubs, but there are some really big companies now, the biggest football agencies in the UK alone, turn over a lot of money. I mean, the agents' fees on a Premier League deal are generally 5% of contract. That's a lot of money. And I do feel that as a journalist, however good your relations are, you tend to be the last call. They are going to, naturally, that's how an agent or a club executive, that's their trade. And so they want to make sure that deal is in place before they pick the phone up and go.
It's interesting how that phone goes very quiet, though. However, when the deal's just about to be done and the clubs ask them to be quiet, don't say anything, and then suddenly I can't get hold of you, but you were pushing them before. But there's an awful lot of pressure on these transfer stories, from not just punters from in the office, someone's rung in and he sounds genuine, and he says such and such. He sounds genuine. I mean, Tom, who serves behind the bar in my local pub, every time I go in, he says, United are going to sign him, they're going to sign him, And if that bloke actually genuinely signs, says, told you, and you never printed it. I'm sorry, Tom, I can't base it on what you've just said, Tom. I can't do it.
Or a private jets and such are off as well.
Well, Fernandez apparently, I was told someone I trusted walked into a Manchester hotel last night. I couldn't prove it. He might still be there, but, it's difficult to then write that story and then be pictured on a shopping trip in Lisbon the next day. So, as Sam says, it's people you know and people you've trusted and people you've known for a long time. And also, what football clubs have to understand, because they hate all this speculation, because it makes them look bad when deals don't go through, is they have to be straight with you as well. So if you go to them and say, is there anything in this or not? I'm not quoting you or anything like that, but just so we're not misleading your fans. If they're straight with you, then there'll be less of this.
But they don't want the fans or anybody else to know that they're after a certain player, because then it alerts every other club, doesn't it?
It depends. Sometimes they want to use us as part of the process.
Well, yes.
One leading club that particularly knowing Associated Press work for has a Spanish language service, knowing that if something was in Spanish, it would perhaps put pressure on a player to join them or help to sort of show that there was some sort of desire for him to join the club. So, and I didn't do the particular story at the time because I did sense we were being used, and the fact clubs want to use us to perhaps help.
Clubs are also very proactive when a deal collapses, in terms of they immediately ring you the next day and say, I'll tell you why it collapsed. We didn't actually want him. He wanted too much money. He had a dodgy... Off the record, he had a dodgy toe as well.
Or make clear they beat another club for a player.
Suddenly we've got all this information the next day when they hadn't spoken to us for 3 days. And
OK, Neil, thank you for that insight. Thank you to all of you for that insight to the transfer window and everything else we've talked about today. But don't forget, you can catch up with today's show on the podcast and demand. Thanks for watching. See you soon next week. Bye for now.
Sky Sports. Feel it all.